2018. I'll mention that in just a minute. All right, so welcome back to Senate Education. It's 2:28 p.m. We have with us Representative Kornheiser from Brattleboro, who is a member of House Ways and Means. We've invited her in, senators will recall, to talk to us about Section 5 of S13, which is the excess spending moratorium piece. And thanks for being with us. We're just wondering if you could give us a little bit of the genesis, how did this idea come about? What's the committee's intentions, hopes, et cetera, for having put it in, and maybe a little bit of some of the testimony that you heard that sort of compelled you in this direction.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for inviting me in. Representative Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro. Nice to be here with you. So earlier in the year, we started having a conversation about the excess spending threshold with regards to school construction. And which led to further conversations about, since the 20 plus years since Act 60 was implemented, we've had various carve outs for the excess spending threshold and various changes. And a lot of what we see in the pupil weighting bill is an acknowledgement that a system that we set up with fantastic intentions that's had some really good impact is not in every way performing as we imagined. And the excess spending threshold and whether or not it works is definitely one of those questions on the table. Works as intended. We were also aware that the impact on the underweighted districts, we've heard from the underweighted districts, perhaps led some of them to be in excess of the spending threshold. And we heard concerns that districts who right now might be considered underweighted, whose weights might shift at implementation of the new pupil weights, if and when that happens, might, by maintaining the same budget, wind up in excess of the excess spending threshold, even though they were keeping their budgets the same. And so given all of those things and all of the changes that are going to be discussed over this next fiscal year, which starts July 1st, and the fiscal year after that, we thought it was best to pause the excess spending threshold while we are moving all the pieces around, moving the parts around, having these conversations, both as an important acknowledgement of the underweighting, a sign that we're really taking these challenges seriously and that we do intend to act, and that some changes might take place that are causing some anxiety for some districts, and this would be a good way to do our very best to allay some of the anxieties. I want to repeat again, it is a moratorium, it is not an ending, it is intended as a 2-year pause while we figure things out to just make sure that we put some emphasis on actually figuring these things out. And I was surprised, just sort of final detail, when I looked at the spreadsheet of which districts are actually in excess, how geographically scattered they are. Like really, and I found sort of the Windham County, Caledonia County emphasis to be really interesting, because I don't usually put those two counties together when I'm thinking about things in common. So that was really interesting for me. And that they tend to not be wealthier districts. I think that was also a surprise to some members of our committee when we looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, yesterday we were talking about the possibility of this decision being connected to federal dollars, as well as to some of the things you mentioned. A lot going on, even with weights, et cetera. And then I have a note here, would this encourage schools to spend more?
So this next fiscal year, the one that starts on July 1st, and I'm sorry, I keep on repeating that, but I find the fiscal year calendar year thing to cause enormous amounts of confusion. So I like to specify every single time I refer to it to keep my own brain straight. This next fiscal year that starts July 1st, which is the first of the 2 fiscal years that the moratorium would be connected to, almost all those budgets are already warned. Most of them are already voted on. So it would not impact the choices around that budget. it would remove the penalty for those who have already hit it, but would not impact how decisions are made with regards to budgeting. And then for that next fiscal year, which would be in 2022, but fiscal year 23, we imagine that actually, given all of the federal dollars that are both about to go out to our districts and already sitting with our districts, and how some folks are really rolling over a lot of that, that it's possible we won't see a single district go over the excess spending threshold in that next year. But again, a lot of this is about signaling that we're taking something seriously, and less about the money, even though there is a fiscal impact that Brianna and Mark can, of course, talk about.
Okay. Committee questions, please. Senator Hooker.
Thank you, Senator Campion. Thank you, Representative Kornheiser, for being here and for telling us about this. I think one of the concerns we had was that it may have been wealthier school districts that would be benefiting from this, but you seem to be saying that that wasn't the case. And I think that we're going to get a list. We were supposed to get a list of those districts, and I'm looking forward to looking at that. But thank you for reiterating that.
Thank you. Ms. Parker.
Muted.
My apologies.
No problem.
Brianna Parker from the Joint Fiscal Office, for the record, and I will send that list right over to Jeannie. And I did want to just say that based on the analysis we did, we lined up the school districts with the results from the UVM weighting study, and we did find that of the 17 districts that went over the excess spending threshold in FY22, 10 of those districts were underweighted. So that does provide some of the data to what we've been discussing.
Interesting. Yeah. Mr. Peralt, did you want to add anything at this point?
I mean, just to remind you that was a request that Senator Chittenden had made last time we met. That was one of the issues he was concerned about. So he's not here today. So
Right. He is not here today, but we'll be checking in later, and any information you have, we'll make sure that he gets. Very helpful. Ms. Kornheiser, Representative Kornheiser, we really appreciate it. The Honorable Representative Kornheiser. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we'll leave it there. This, as you know, Representative, I don't know if you heard at the start of committee, it looks like we're trying to pull the 2 chairs of Ed and the 2 chairs of Finance and Ways and Means together to sort of get to a path forward, so that if the Senate ends up concurring with further proposal of amendment, everybody will be in agreement. And I think based on the testimony we've heard from you and from Dr. Colby and others, I think we're feeling pretty good. I think that's safe to say. And given that the excess spending piece is now part of S13, that, as I think you and I discussed, is now going to be also looked at in finance.
And I believe the chair of Ways and Means was in finance just a few minutes ago to discuss the issue. And
Okay.
I'll say, I think we certainly had a lot of anxiety on our side as the bill was coming over to see what a path forward would be.
Yeah.
And it's really been incredible to see how both committees came together to, vote this out unanimously. It's been a pretty incredible process to get through and to hear from the communities that are so differently impacted. So thank you very much for your attention, and great to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much. Have a good afternoon. Okay, committee. Mr. Peralt, anything else to add at this point?
no, except to remind you that the bill's also going to have to make stop in appropriations committees, because there are some per diems in there and there's some money for a consultant. So
And I'll ask Senator Kitchell to start looking now, because correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not sure if you or Mr. Desmarais or Ms. Parker know this. But it hasn't, this bill isn't even on notice yet. Unless I'm in the House. It's not, yeah, it has not been even put on notice. So it must be in a House of Probes.
I think it is.
So yes, it'll take a step into approach, and I appreciate that reminder as we're trying to pull people together to see if we can all get somewhere so that it doesn't get lost this year. In other words, it's getting to us. I don't even want to say late because that would make it in a way. I think I don't want to insinuate in any way that the House hasn't been working incredibly hard on it and just doing its due diligence. It's just a late time of year, and we all know what that means, and we don't want to lose it. So, terrific. So I think right now, unless I'm seeing additional questions, we will we'll pause our work. We'll touch base with finance and approps and continue sort of as a group working our way through this. And when we see it, which likely won't be until sometime in the middle of next week, we may be able to, with our colleagues in approps and finance, concur with further proposal of amendment, knowing that the House would agree with that, or perhaps there's a committee of conference. We'll see. Senator Lyons.
So, no, I'm just looking at the list, the excess spending
Oh,
list
yeah.
that Brianna sent us. And it's interesting, to say the least. So some of those so for example, Buell's Gore, that used to be in my district and now it's not, but so the question is, why are they spending $30,000 per pupil? And I don't know whether those kids are tuitioned out to some independent private someplace. I don't know what's going on there. So, and actually, if we give an exemption for that, let's suppose that school district, just that one, that will not, and they're forgiven for their excess spending for those 2 years, that won't do anything to keep them from continuing that. Just anyway.
Unless, as you pointed out initially, and I don't know that district well, if it is just
It's tiny.
Is it ascending town? Does anyone know if it's?
I think it must be. Yeah.
They have
It's
a very,
very
very
tiny.
small number of students, Joe.
Yeah.
You said three kids.
Yeah, it's very few. I think it changes slightly year over year, but it's a very, very small number of
It's
students.
kind of an anomalous
Yeah.
district. And I don't think it was included in the UVM study, for
It was not.
example.
Oh, okay. We won't take that as a,
Do they have a school there, or is it
No.
that everyone is tuitioned out? Okay,
Buell's Gore is right smack dab next to the Huntington River, between the
right.
river
okay,
and the mountains, and
That's
there
right.
isn't much there. So anyway,
Yes, please, Senator Hooker.
Senator Campion, thank you. I'm thinking about the language in the bill regarding the task force and what the task force is required to do. Is it, listening to Dr. Colby, she seems to think that they have latitude, they have flexibility. Is there anything wrong with putting some language in that would say, to look at the report and other factors? I don't know if that Senator Perchlik isn't here, but to make him feel better about the idea that, this isn't just the report that we're looking at and kind of saying, yes, this is what we're going to do. And so.
Yeah, so I can happy to touch base with Senator Perchlik again. I felt as though he left comfortable. We wouldn't do anything. He would still have time to propose language, but I'm happy to bring it to our joint committee and with the, asking that question. Would, for example, Ways and Means and House Ed, if we were to propose that, would everybody be okay with it?
Okay.
Yeah.
so the last question that I asked Dr. Colby about being willing to give information to or support or give a short report to the task force. I think for me, if we had something in there that the task force would consult with the authors of the report initially, some initial contact, because the way she described the analyses that the task force can do really identified significant flexibility and in their work. So
And the waiting, yeah.
it was it was helpful to me. So different ways of calculating economic disadvantage, for example, and within the weighting system.
Yeah.
I don't
So-
know what, so something to talk about maybe with the other chairs.
Yeah, and Jim, if you don't mind, just maybe we'll just start to put together some language as a possible amendment. Given, what kind of incorporating what Senators Lyons and Hooker are mentioning, and that's something I could bring to the other chairs. Again, making certain that that the committee is indeed comfortable and feels convinced that the task force will indeed take all of these, that has the flexibility it needs. Yeah, to reach out to others. So, Senator Sharonzini.
Yeah, I'll just concur with what everyone else has said. And thanks for bringing that up, Senator Hooker. I took the note as well that it seemed to me that the language from the House was too narrow and the committee needed more flexibility in terms of being able to look elsewhere besides for just that report, especially if it could help with any of the planning process and so on. So I think some additional language would be good.
Jim, do you have any questions back to us at this point?
So I've got the point about task force working with the author of the report. In terms of flexibility in language, though, that gets quite specific. And if we focus in on the first task of the task force, which is, I think, where Senator Persick was concerned, maybe we could look at that and just giving some more guidance as to how you want to change that language. So if you're on page 3 of the side-by-side, on the right-hand column, it's the language that I think you're finding to be a bit restrictive. And I'm just wondering how you want that to be changed.
So you're specific, you're talking about where it starts, consider how to integrate.
Yep. Yeah.
Senator Hooker, please.
I know that Dr. Colby said it was a matter of interpretation, but I think I agree with Jim that it's rather restrictive. And
Well, I will say on that point, though, that the report has various scenarios on the weighting calculation. So it's not as if the language that is in Ways and Means is like a single thing. It's like they've got to look at various scenarios, which one to integrate, right? So there is flexibility within the report too, in terms of which one you're going with. So for example, they've controlled for students with disabilities, and then they have weights that don't control for that. So they have different option packages, if you will.
Right, that's right.
There is some flexibility built in there because the report is designed that way.
Yeah.
But what it doesn't seem to contemplate is going outside the report for using different weights that aren't identified in the report. Unless we get into the question with her about it being a package, and I'm not sure exactly what that means, frankly, but I hear what she's saying. So it goes back to the question. I'm not sure quite what you want to do with that language.
Senator Lyons.
I'm looking at those that is so helpful, Jim, really, because if you look at our number one and the House number one, and we're talking about whether to eliminate weights, and I don't know if when Dr. Colby was talking, she was talking about a package of weights.
Mhm.
So maybe our language needs to be modified, but then if you modify it to the extent that the House has, it is extremely narrow. So maybe there's a way to keep the weights, allow for the flexibility in the weighting calculations,
Mhm.
optional weighting calculations based on what? Does it have to be what would it be based on? Based on what? Various parameters.
Hmm.
I'm asking Jim that question because he's the brains.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I,
well, well, in a way, I think what waste means is looking for is if you were going to integrate the weights from the report, and again, I'm not clear on which weights, but weights from the report, what would that look like? If you just took the report basically and
Yeah.
chose a path,
right.
what would that look like in terms of calculations and how it flows into equalized pupil calculations, excess spending, etc. So that's one thing. I suppose you could add,
But not limited to.
yeah, add another version here. So add a 1A here, if you will, that says also consider whether you know any of the weights from the report should be modified in some way, right? So I think we're looking for some room to allow them to think about modification. And maybe you just need like a 1A here to say, okay, go integrate the weights as they are, but also come back and think about whether that's right and whether there should be some adjustments to the weights.
Okay.
If that's what you want, I can draft that as a,
I mean, drafting it, if just to start to get some language on a piece of paper, I think is fine, and we can just start to. That's what I would recommend doing. Just start to get some ideas down. I wouldn't draft it as an amendment, but you know what I'm saying.
if I draft it, it has to be drafted as something. So I think it would be it'd be in the form of an amendment,
Right.
by your committee when you have it for next week.
Well, I guess I'm just not at the, but I'm only one, not at the stage that I'm feeling convinced that we need to do it. But drafting it and giving me some language that I can say that this is something that my committee is interested in when we talk with Ways and Means, I think could be helpful.
Okay.
Getting their feedback. Mark, did you want to add something?
Just to point out, if you do that, there are other references throughout the tasks that refer to specifically to the recommended weights. So if you want to broaden it beyond the weights that are included in the report as they were reported, you might want to change those sections as well. Section 6, Section 7.
If the committee is comfortable, maybe I'll raise this with the group and see what kind of response I get. And again, even though we're in a rush, we can't rush until we get the bill. So which isn't going to be until next week. If people are comfortable, I can raise this concern without language and report back. If that's okay with people. I'm looking to senators. Is that okay? Okay.
Fine.
Okay. Okay, Jim, nothing to draft, I think, at this point.
Okay, yep.
We'll just keep talking.
Yep.
Anything else from either you, Mr. Desmarais, or you, Mr. Peralt, or Ms. Parker? Okay. Committee, given that we're down a couple, I'm going to ask that we postpone our vote on S-115. This would be just the amendment that we are all have looked at from the Social Equity Caucus, or we worked with the Social Equity Caucus, and we worked with the state board. It sounds like, and with the Agency of Education, that the House is, I know they're reviewing it right now, so I'm planning that tomorrow we would vote. I'm hoping I can gather everybody sometime in the morning before the floor, just to vote to concur on S-115 with further proposal of amendment. And that further proposal of amendment, again, would be the social, diversifying the State Board of Education, and the language that the Agency of Education and the State Board came to us with early on, in advance, that knowing that the House hopefully will be giving us the green light today, that language would be okay with them. And then when they get S-115, it would be all steam ahead on their end. Jim, does that sound okay to you?
Fine with me.
Okay. And I'll touch base with Senator Chittenden. And so tomorrow, just look, I'm hoping maybe we could gather about 9:30. Probably won't take very long at all. Maybe 5 or 6 minutes. We'll do that. I'll also look for any concerns with giving the green light to finance on the language that they put in the yield bill regarding the small school grants, which I didn't see any concerns with, but those are the two things I'd like to do at about 9:30 tomorrow morning. And that's it. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.